Hello, everybody, and thank you for having me at the RISC-V in Space conference. Recker is an EDA company. We are specifically a functional verification company, and our job is to generate test content for existing test benches in simulation, emulation, FPGA, and post-silicon. Our claim to fame is that we have invented a unique way to generate very complicated test cases. And this talk is about how we're applying this to RISC-V and specifically RISC-V in space. My name is Adnan Hamid. I am founder and CTO at Recker. My background is in CPU and server verification. In the early 90s, an early version of this technology was used to beat the first 3 generations of AMD CPUs into submission, and it was used to verify their cores. And some 32 years later, that application is still going strong because it is a testament to the strength of this type of test generation that tool is finding more bugs for them than other strategies for verifying CPUs. Of course, they have other strategies. When we talk about putting RISC-V in space, of course, we have a lot of challenges. Verifying any CPU is hard. Verifying RISC-V, which is fairly emergent, specifications that are complex to understand, many different players building parts of the system, not only the CPU, but also the SoC. This naturally presents both great advantages and great risk to us, right? And of course, when putting these devices out in space, where it is perhaps a little bit difficult to go fix them if there's something wrong, these things have to be thoroughly verified and validated beyond a shadow of a doubt. Also in space, we want to follow DO 254 for reliability. And this is based on the idea of the V model that I will talk about more, where we want traceability between requirements, our test plans, and our coverage. So it turns out that Recker's strategy for generating test cases is uniquely suited for this problem. And we will talk about how we automate that entire flow from requirements to test cases to coverage closure. Recker offers 2 system VIPs, pre-built solutions for verification, if you will. One for RISC-V cores and one for RISC-V systems. The concerns in verification and validation in these 2 areas are overlapping but different. The CPU guys tend to be much more interested in stressing their pipelines and their interrupts and privilege levels and so on. The system guys are much more worried about multi-core execution, system-level cache coherency, routing, interrupts from the SoC as opposed to exceptions within the core, and so on. So over here, these 2 tables roughly explain the high-level points that are covered in each of these applications. And I won't go through them, but if you're a CPU verification guy, you'll recognize the table on the left as, yeah, these are obviously the things you want to do. And if you're a RISC-V SoC verification guy, you're going to look at the table on the right and go, yeah, that's more or less what I'm going to do. When this technology is actually applied to a design, here, these pictures show how the technology actually works. So in the case of CPU verification, the system VIP comes into this tool, Recker's TREC, test suite synthesis tool. And for each test case, it will spit out a C program and a matching so-called TBX file. The C program is designed to be compiled with our customer's compiler and a customer's boot code to be loaded into the CPU memory and executed on the CPU memory. The TBX file is picked up by this runtime component called the TREC blocks, and this guy is there to synchronize external I/O. All right. He actually does 3 things for us. He drives our external I/O, driving and checking interfaces. He drives our high-level debug, and he drives our performance profiling. And for a single CPU design, you want that external control for external interrupts, I/O, MMU kind of operations, pushing on debug extensions, and so on. Conversely, when we're dealing with a multi-CPU system, the tool will spit out, again, a C program, but now with separate programs for each of the CPUs that were co-generated and doing cooperative multi-threading. Again, compiled with the customer's compiler, customer's boot code. And again, a TBX file. And now we definitely need multi-core systems to deal with testing atomics, testing a lot of the coherency scenarios, testing a lot of the memory ordering issues. And of course, we need to be synchronizing things like I/O from PCI Express, I/O from Ethernet, and so on. This slide gives you a little bit of insight into the strategy that Brecker is using for test suite synthesis. The basic idea is that there is a planning algorithm, an AI planning engine, an expert system. So this is not LLMs and deep learning. This is coming more from rule-based systems, but it is traversing a large graph to come up with the various scenarios it wants to search. And what we have over here is expanding only. So each of these green boxes can be expanded into another box like this, another picture like this. We've only expanded part of the graph. But this is the graph for the MMU testing. And really what I want to show you is there's some section of the graph that is making decisions about page table entry flags for leaf page tables. And there are different rules for non-leaf page tables. You've got to decide where your page table entries are. You've got to decide whether you're dealing with one-stage translation or two-stage hypervisor translation. You've got to decide whether you're trying to do a load, store, execute into that virtual address. You've got to decide which privilege level you're going to do this in. And when you start multiplying out all those possibilities, you end up with some 10 to the 138 paths. Okay. So the point over here is that the verification space for RISC-V is very, very large, and tools such as this are good at getting their arms around this problem, right? Nobody's going to run 10 to the 138 test cases, but it's important that we understand that these test cases exist and that we have covered the correct and important crosses in that space. So coming back to DO254 in space and the V model and reliability, right? I am probably the last person to be lecturing this particular Ghost room on how this stuff works. But the basic idea of the V model is that we want to start with high-level specifications and bring them down to more detailed specifications. And as we have the details, we want to come up the right-hand side of the V model, first to unit testing, then block testing, system testing, all the way to full safety and system tests. And we want traceability, right? We want to know that we've tested everything and we have closed the coverage. So you want this entire loop. And in my next few slides, I will talk about how the test suite synthesis approach directly addresses this problem for DO254, as well as the automotive ISO 26262. So what we have done at Brecker is some very, very, very tedious work, where we have gone through the RISC-V specification clause by clause, not even sentence by sentence, right? Attaching them to our test plan. And the lines that are in blue are things that we are sure we have covered. And once in a while, you see some pieces of black that we're looking at these going, okay, some of these things are not yet covered. And of course, this makes us very naked to our customers, because you're all going to come back and look at all the black pieces and say, hey, why aren't you doing this piece? Yes, sir, we haven't got there yet. But we probably are better than anybody else in the industry in terms of a coverage of the RISC-V specification. The spec is directly connected to a test plan developed by Brecker, and the test plan is directly connected to nodes in this graph that I have shown you. And this is how we're doing our traceability from requirements to test plans to test cases to coverage of those test cases. So what you're seeing over here on the right-hand side is a picture where we have taken a portion of the graph and blown it out into a tree, so we can talk about every possible path through that graph. And the green paths are the ones that have been exercised and the red ones that have not yet been exercised. So this way you can see exactly what your traceability is. And the idea, of course, over here is that you can go through a clause in your requirement and say, okay, we can chase that down to exactly where it is covered in the test plan. You can look at this and go, okay, do we think Brecker knows what they're talking about, or do we think they're full of it? Does it satisfy the needs for my particular application? And then from each clause in the test plan, you can map directly to the node in the graph that is supposed to be exercising that node. So you can then tie that to the coverage you have received. So to wrap this up, and hopefully I am still more or less on time, maybe even a little bit ahead. The objective over here is to meet the needs of RISC-V in space for verification and validation. And thank you actually to Geisler, who are the first guys who brought us into the space. By automating this coverage model, we think we are doing a good job of traceability between requirements, test cases, and coverage. And this is all done in a fully automated fashion. I have possibly a few minutes to answer questions, but Miguel Koch is in the room with you. Miguel, raise your hand. And he is an expert. And if I cannot answer your questions, go to him.
No questions. We don't have questions. Yeah.
Okay. Well, maybe they can ask me questions afterwards. But thank you very much. That is my little presentation.